Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Trying to Be Positive. We're doing an intro this week where I sound like a mature adult because we have one of my idols on the podcast, the infamous Aviva Romm, who walks the very careful tightrope between alternative and allopathic medicine with such eloquence and grace, you are going to be astounded. I aspire to live in a way that is as thoughtful and careful and empathetic as she. But until then, we can listen to her advice, we can learn from her perspective, and we can hopefully enjoy this interview as much as I did doing it. I don't know if that makes sense, but we'll figure it out when I listen back to this when Ryan sends it to me. Okay. And remember, I almost forgot. Please rate, review, subscribe to the podcast, because even though you're thinking to yourself, it's Monday, I've got stuff to do, I don't have time for this, Anne. It makes such a difference. Not only in how the podcast is ranked, but also how many guests we're able to attract and bring on the podcast to give you, my beloved listeners, more insight, more perspectives, more information. Here we go. Without further ado, Trying to Be Positive with Aviva Romm. Dr. Aviva Romm. I have told everybody I know about this interview, to the point where my husband, who remembers nothing, brought me a coffee prior to the interview because he knew about this.
Love it. Aww.
And he was like, make
awesome.
sure don't. He knows nothing.
Trying to keep you awake? Is he trying to keep you awake?
He's like, this of all things, you must
on point, girl.
Keep it together, Ann Matthews. So here we are. You've had such an interesting geographical experience through your practice, because I know you were originally from New York, and then at 15 was it? You
15.
went off.
It depends what you're going to say. But
to pre-med.
I went off to college. Yeah, I went off to college at 15 and was studying pre-med.
And then something shifted.
That was in Massachusetts, so I went from New York to Massachusetts. Yeah.
And then something shifted, and you then decided to go into herbalism and midwifery.
Yeah.
What was the precipice for that?
I met a guy.
No,
it's just like a
one of those.
It's not like a
stories.
No, actually, I had a friend when I went to school at 15. I went to college. He was a couple of years older, super progressive, actually Mayan Mexican guy who grew up also in New York City and was just really ahead of his time on things like, he handed me my first midwifery book when I was 15 to look at. We were in a bookstore together. He said, check this book out. I have this book. And he did. And then he
had that book?
Yeah, it was really weird, but he did. He was so into early things. So yeah, he opened my eyes to midwifery and herbal medicine. We were never a couple. We were just friends. But so I just jokingly say I met a guy. But truly I did. And that set me onto a whole new path, because at that time, this was 1981, Bastyr University for naturopathic medicine was just in its nascence. There was nowhere to study this stuff. And there were really no modern midwifery books. There were like a few herbal books on the market, 2 of them from Europe. And one was a herbal body book that was from the United States. So I had to really seek it out. And in order to do that, I actually apprenticed myself to a midwife in Boston. So I actually left school at 16 and started on this whole other journey of basically becoming an autodidact, which is a very nice way of saying I read books and studied with people to explore this other path. So I went from New York, where I was born and raised, to Western Mass, where I went off to college, to Boston to study midwifery and herbal medicine.
And was it just what you were reading in that book and the experiences that you were sharing with this individual that really opened your eyes, or was it something that you were always interested in?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. As a little kid, I was a science like brainiac. I mean, like, my earliest memories are weird stuff, like having a rock collection and wearing this pair of goggles in my grandfather's garage and using a hammer to try to crack open the rocks and create my own geodes, which, like, you can't do just by cracking open any random rocks. But I had, like, a rock collection, I had a shell collection, I had a plant collection where I pressed plants between books. I was always reading astronomy, biology. I had, like, one of those, Invisible Women kits where you could put
Yep.
together, like, a human body. I mean, I was just always, always, always into stuff like that. So, and then I got my first kind of taste of herbal medicine when I was really young. My grandfather had a cousin who lived up in the mountains in the Catskills of New York, who gave me my first spearmint to plant. That was my first herb. So it was like little things peppered through my life, even randomly, like growing up in a housing project. So I was like literally living in an urban jungle, concrete jungle, but these things kind of just wove through. And I was a science fair kid and a spelling bee kid. I just loved that stuff. And so, but kind of going natural, going into like herbal medicine, the only exposure I had had at all related to that was in 6th grade. My best friend's mom was Swiss, and we had colds, and she made us some linden blossom tea. And my mom loved to cook. My grandmother loved to cook. My great grandmother loved to cook. I later found out that my great grandmother actually formally practiced herbal medicine, but I didn't know that till my 20s. Um, but yeah, it was just kind of something that clicked in me. But I think there's a context for all of this. It was 1981. It was the Cold War. It was nuclear arms escalation. I mean, like, literally, it was like, what's going to happen? It was the first Earth Day conference at that time, like the first Earth Day event festival at that time. And so I felt an inner urgency to be able to have these survival skills, actually. So I learned how to make fire by friction, how to make shoes, like moccasins, how to skin and brain tan animals, I wasn't a survivalist, but like as part of the extended herbal community, there were people who were reclaiming or learning these skills. And I learned how to make cordage, weave baskets, identify plants, um, cook in an open fire, like all these things. So it was kind of all part of this reclaiming, and midwifery and herbal medicine were part of that. At the same time, also, I was studying about environmental politics, food politics, pharmaceutical company politics, women's health politics. And so for me, there was this intersection of like, okay, let's reclaim women's health, reclaim women's power. I'm definitely a product of a feminist mom of the 60s. So it kind of all just created this gestalt inside of me. I was like, oh, I love all of this. It all comes together. And I just kind of went wild studying it and became my life.
And then you had your 4 small children.
I did.
And then once they were old enough, you turned back into Western med.
Well, I wouldn't say I
Not
turned back
away
into Western
from,
med.
but more
I never turned away from it, and I never turned back into it. It was more, I had now had a midwifery practice for almost 20 years and an herbal medicine practice for almost 20 years, and I was not seeing things getting better in
right.
Western medicine. But now there were more midwives, there were more herbalists. But if you were having a home birth or you had a medical need, you now had to go into the medical model, and it was terrifying for women. And so for me, I really felt like I needed to go into the system and understand the system, but have the language of the system and be able to use that system to help people who needed to interact with that system or intersect with that system. So that was really, it was never a turning back to Western medicine. I prescribe medications when they're needed, but it's not my first go to. I really think of myself as a midwife herbalist who happens to have an MD degree, which I'm very grateful for. But it wasn't like I turned to it. It was more like, all right, this is the dominant system. And in order to be able to make change in the system and for women, I need to I need to be able to speak that language. I need to be able to be fluent in that. I need to be able to have the credential and the credibility within that to be recognized by that, to influence that. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. I
Yeah.
frequently find myself having to defend what I do, and even
Mhm.
in our initial introduction, discuss the fact that I have 2 undergrad degrees before my qualification as a doctor of TCM matters. And
Yeah, and for me,
obviously,
it wasn't I didn't feel like I needed to defend, or for me personally, I get it where people are coming
that's
from when
because
they're in
you're
that
not
situation.
emotionally stunted the way I am.
Well, no, I probably am too. But, what I did need I'm like, look, I practiced midwifery in Atlanta, Georgia for the better part of 17 years. I practiced in another state for a couple of years, but, Georgia, the state of Georgia has currently 90 counties that have 0 maternal health, like no OBs, no gynecologists, no hospitals, no birthing centers, nothing. And has toggles back and forth basically like with Alabama and Mississippi for the worst infant and maternal mortality rates in the country. Midwives in Georgia, home birth midwives are still illegal, not illegal, illegal. And so to me, it was about being able to have an impact on things like that, that I didn't feel like I could do adequately as a midwife. Just like a believability factor or a credibility factor that for me felt part of just change making, which look, many midwives do without that credential and without any licensing. There are incredible activists out there who are doing the work, but I wanted to also be able to provide the care for the moms and then the babies too and the children.
I'm such a huge fan, I think, because of how you address the root, and I feel like that's likely because of your origin story, and
Oh yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
I
Yeah.
think that that's something that's definitely lacking right now in Canada where I am, and where, specifically Ontario, I mostly practice fertility acupuncture, and there's such an emphasis right now on using IVF, and so when infertility is brought up, the first go-to is,
Mhm.
instead of even discussing the health of the individuals who are suffering from the disorder, it's immediately a lack of funding. Like, we need more funding for more IVF, not we need better diagnostics and more tailored plans for these patients.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
it's almost as though, the egg and the sperm cell and the humans that they are coming from are secondary to what could be created for them in the lab. Like, the raw material itself doesn't even matter anymore. And I'm wondering if you and your perspective, I'm so curious about it, how you would think about leaning so much on IVF, and like
Yeah.
where you feel fertility care should be going, and where it is going.
Yeah, it's complicated, right? I mean, there's a saying that if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. And when any profession, and particularly when medicine has a very narrow perspective on what its tools are, those tools are going to be applied pretty much to every woman, everyone seeking fertility care. And then it's impossible to take away, and I don't know what it's like in Canada, but here in the US, I mean, it's a cash cow, right? Fertility is a cash cow.
Yeah.
And a round of IVF might be paid for now. It previously was, very exclusive and hard to achieve for people financially. But a round is often not enough. And this is an industry that can cost tens of thousands of dollars out of pocket, and people expect to pay for that because what price wouldn't you pay on having a child if you want one? And there's very little broader thinking in medicine. And look, it's like the same with diabetes, right? You maybe with diabetes, maybe you see a nutritionist, but there's still primarily a focus on medication. It's not like appendicitis, where if you have a ruptured appendix, the only options are surgery and antibiotic. It's not an emergency, but with most medical conditions, it's a very narrow medication or surgical approach, right? Hammers and nails. What medicine does the best, I think, is handle emergencies or respond when situations are difficult or intractable. And then you really do need, or maybe even before they get there, but when things aren't going as as one might hope with other therapies. But what medicine rarely looks at is what are the nutritional factors that support fertility for men and for both couples in a partnership, if there's a partnership, or for a person individually. What role do endocrine disruptors have? What role does alcohol have? What role does stress and anxiety have? What role does just not waiting long enough have, right? There's so many factors that go into fertility, and a large percentage of the time we don't even know what's causing it. And we don't say, okay, in those cases, let's look to these other factors. So there's a pretty quick jump from difficulty getting pregnant, or even it taking longer than one might think to get pregnant, um, and getting fertility treatments. And there's been a lot of critique, a growing amount of critique in the literature about the overinflation of positive outcomes with some of these therapies, and the under recognition or under acknowledgement of really the significance of this being an actual industry, right? That there are other incentives aside from just helping people that are at play. Um, so I think there's a lot of complicated issues. And then you add to that, women are waiting longer to start to build their families. So there may actually be that contribution as well to declining ovarian reserve, declining egg quality, and things like that. There are also more women who are choosing to, not just women, but couples who are not sort of gender typical in terms of how they're choosing to pursue their fertility, or gender normative, or gay couples, gay men who want to use IVF and a surrogate. So there are a lot of permutations of why somebody may choose to or actually need to pursue that. And I want to not disparage or be negative of that for anyone who needs it. But I do think we jump to that really quickly for the average woman seeking, or average couple seeking fertility care.
Yeah, I frequently will say to patients that I'm not anti IVF and that I think that it's an amazing technology for those who require it. But I really appreciate the fact that you've said the not waiting long enough, because I
Mhm.
do find that that is where a lot of the fear comes in, is that if it takes a longer amount of time, it means that there is something wrong.
Right.
I don't know. My approach, and maybe you won't necessarily agree with it, but is very much to get all of the diagnostics done rather quickly. And then once confirmed that everything is running as it should, and actually running as it should, like really actually using those hormones and giving the information correctly, like, AMH not being the end of the world, and
Yeah.
how it should be partnered with FSH and estrogen, and, a general overview of the couple's fertility. If all is going relatively well, tell them to, in fact, go forth and
Yeah.
continue trying. I
Mhm.
I have so many patients where they, waited the 6 months, it didn't happen after 6 months, and then they jump into the throes of a fertility clinic, which then it's hard not to be disparaging, because it's like watching people go down a cylinder of despair. This intervention didn't work, now this intervention didn't work, and now this, and then they find themselves at the
Yeah.
bottom of that funnel, truly believing that they are broken,
Yeah.
only to then 3 months later get pregnant.
Yeah, I've seen that so many
You know?
times. Like, go have a take a break. I can't tell you how many people in my practice, like, take a break from trying and go on a
Yeah.
holiday for a long weekend. Go on, don't even time it when you're fertile, just go away for 2 weeks. Go do what you can, get away, but put down all the testing and just give it a minute. Put down all the, like, checking your ovulation, all of it. Just give it a
Right.
minute, and then they get pregnant.
Yeah, or just like not even necessarily relax, or don't even necessarily go on a vacation, but forget about fertility. Just
Yeah.
be a regular human being in your regular
Exactly.
life.
Yeah,
You know what
because
I
it's
mean?
such an emotional roller coaster. I mean, every ovulation cycle, every next period is a disappointment. The pressure, sex stops being sex for pleasure's sake. It starts to become mechanical and pressured. And there's so many, it just becomes not fun anymore, not enjoyable. And I get it. I mean, I get it. If you're just in that space and you're struggling, but I do agree with you that it gets compounded by the tests, the procedures, the diagnoses, the failures to conceive.
Right.
The word failure is so prevalent in there. So
Yeah,
yeah,
the
I
language is
mhm.
awful.
Yeah. So no, I don't disagree. And I think even if you look at it from like a medical perspective, that the guidelines are if you're under 35 and it takes 12 months or more, if you're over 35 and it takes six months or more to go ahead and get testing. But even from a reproductive endocrinology perspective, from a doctor perspective, which I'm not a fertility doctor, but this is my wheelhouse too.
Yeah.
People are often the kind of like the MO is still go ahead. Look, if it's 3 months or 4 months, but you're stressing, there's no reason to not get all the basic testing. You have to do anything invasive, but just get the information because one, it can put your mind at ease if everything's okay, and two, it can give you a direction to move in if things aren't okay. Like, why wait 3 more months if something is actually not okay? And then, of course, we know that a lot of fertility challenges are not the female. And we do know that there have been changes in male fertility quality, male sperm count, male morphology, et cetera, for sperm morphology over the last decade also. So getting both partners tested is really important.
What are your thoughts on the obsession with egg quality? Because I will say, for the most part, with most of your books, it's very much focused on a whole person perspective.
Yeah.
And I especially love your focus on adrenals and the thyroid, and also actually how much you've written about fibroids generally. I feel like these
Mm-hmm.
are topics that inform areas that are not often discussed.
Mm-hmm.
There's such a hyperfixation on egg quality. And I
Yeah.
find it particularly interesting, A, because in Chinese medicine, egg quality and Jing or Qi are linked. But also, I have so many patients that have undergone chemotherapy and radiation for, blood cancers and breast cancer predominantly. And they have then gone on to use their own eggs and
Mm-hmm.
and have healthy children. And my thought process, and obviously this is very generalized, is very much, if chemotherapy is not going to damage one's eggs,
Mm-hmm.
is drinking out of a plastic water bottle? Do you know what I mean? Or like,
Yeah. I mean, chemotherapy, radiation chemotherapy, and these things, cancer can impact a woman's fertility, and her treatments can, which is why some women egg freeze or do, ovarian tissue harvest before undergoing chemotherapy. So I don't want to discount that it can
no,
impact, but
definitely.
yes, one can absolutely have a history of cancer and cancer treatment and go on and have healthy eggs. It kind of goes back to, I think, what you said earlier, which is we do want to think about the raw material, right? When we talk about herbal medicine, for example, the tincture or the product is only as good as the starting raw materials, right? Same with cooking. The quality of a salad is going to be based on the quality of the ingredients that you used. That said, I do think that there is a hyperfixation on things that are almost a little too granular. Like, if your health is overall good, you ideally would have wonderful egg quality and have a healthy embryo. Similarly, you want healthy sperm, right? But it's
Right.
not like we're going to go and harvest eggs from every woman and assess her egg quality. So I think working on overall health is really the most important thing to do. Within that, there may be, because the data is very mixed, things that we can do to at the least maybe give ourselves some reassurance that we're doing a little more. So whether it's taking some melatonin or CoQ10 or riboflavin, where there are small, potentially promising studies that say these may enhance mitochondrial function or the fluid that the ovum is bathing in, and thereby impart healthier egg quality. I don't think there's harm in doing those things. So, is there obvious, clear, proven benefit? I wouldn't say that either.
Yeah, it's interesting because like the male patients that I see, I'm like, you can make huge changes. Your sperm cells will be completely anew in 90 days. Like what you're doing right now will have such an impact, obviously putting aside more extreme cases where the patient has a varicocele or has like an
Mm.
addiction problem. For the most part, if you start making changes as a male, then your sperm is going to take a turn for the best.
Mhm.
Whereas with women, it feels like they're willing to do so much and make so many changes to the point where they're now not even wearing makeup and
Mhm.
like wearing a
Yeah.
mask whenever they go
Well, I
outside.
don't think that wearing makeup or drinking out of a plastic water bottle now and again is going to harm your fertility. I do think we wanna think about the aggregate exposures that we all get over the course of our lifetime and in our adult lifetime when many women are wearing multiple different cosmetics and perfumes and having phthalate and PFAS exposures. And then on top of it, you've got your treated carpets and your treated furniture and your nonstick pans and your plastic water bottle that you're drinking out of every single day, herbicides and pesticides in foods. I don't think we can say that those things don't make an impact either. So, what I would say is do the big things that you can make the changes in, and then don't sweat the small stuff, right? Yeah, and don't go crazy making yourself all stressed about it.
What are the big things that you would say? Like if you could choose five
Yeah.
for women to focus on
Yep.
to
So
ensure good egg quality?
Yeah, so I would say, 1, make sure that you're getting, just optimal nutrients in your diet and consider maybe a multivitamin for the little micronutrients here and there that you might not optimally getting from your diet. And then make sure you're getting your macronutrients, your good quality fats, good quality protein, and if you're eating, carbs, make sure that and I do recommend eating some carbs, healthful whole grain sources of carbs and plant-based, like starches, legumes, etc. So making sure that you're getting all the nutrition you need. And fats are important, right? Your hormones are built on fats. Cholesterol is what is building block for hormones. So that's one. I would say two is within your diet, focus on the foods that you can eat organic, being your meats and your dairy, because that is where you're going to get from a environmental perspective. Fat holds on to a lot of these PFAS and other environmental chemicals, animal tissue, animal fat. So if you're going to eat meat and dairy, make it organic. That's important too. And there's been a lot of emphasis on the eating of full fat dairy. But when they actually sub-analyzed the data, it wasn't specifically the full fat dairy that improved fertility. It was getting enough fat and getting enough calcium in the diet. So you can do that other ways too. Um, I do think it's important to not store your food and not drink as much as possible out of plastic containers. Those do leach into our food just for your overall health in general, the things that we're downloading to our children through our bloodstream. As much as you can avoid forever chemicals, avoid them. It's not just for you, it's also like if you're avoiding them, you're making better choices for the planet. So I do think that's important. Getting good sleep and stress reduction is important. We do know that that can have a huge impact on our well-being. And then I would get some basic labs, really just get some basic labs. Do you have enough iron? How's your thyroid function? Is there a lot of inflammation? What's going on? Basically, Are you ovulating? Are you producing estrogen, progesterone at adequate levels? And I guess within that, I would say really understanding your cycle can be really helpful, because if you're not ovulating, you can't get pregnant. So I may even just bump ovulation to the top there. Are you ovulating? Right? Start with that and do all the things that support ovulation.
I mean, I really should emphasize, like, I am a raging hypochondriac who hasn't
Oh,
consumed things out of plastic for, I don't know, 20 years.
I'm
Like,
on an airplane where I can't bring my own water bottle and fill it up to do it.
yeah.
I
Yeah, I
and I
won't
don't store
I'm,
my
like,
food in
scared of
plastic
tap water.
containers. Yeah, I mean, I have well water, but I don't store my food in plastic containers either. And actually the well water comes through PVC pipes, and I don't love that either, but there was nothing I could do about that. There was no way to prevent that from happening. But yeah, I'm pretty strict about that, and I'm pretty strict about not I don't have any scented, perfumed things in my house or my car. I try to really avoid any of the phthalate scented type of things. Even like some of the natural candles and things like that, I'll occasionally burn like a soy candle, but I try to avoid the heavy scents in my life.
I have 3 members of my family who died from leukemia, so became
Hmm.
very hyperfixated on toxins specifically and how it could impact me and my future spawn. And so the call to action was when I was fairly young and also
Mhm.
was very strong. It was very
Mhm.
convincing.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but in terms of like what you see and changes that you have seen
Mhm.
in terms of, general toxicity and outlook from a pregnancy standpoint, do you notice, now that we're using more scented products or now that we have more plastics, just generally in our environment, is it harder to encourage women to have more of a natural pregnancy, or is it
Who says things to parents like, your mothers, don't worry about the toxins in your baby's baby wipes, and don't worry about the toxins in menstrual products, and don't worry about the toxins in chocolate, or whatever she's saying.
right?
And and a lot of women listen to that, and I think that that is very nearsighted, in the sense that, look, we can go back to the 1960s, Rachel Carson, we can go to the 80s, Theo Colburn, we can look at data that if I were to print out articles that would go from floor to ceiling in my office multiple times over, good data. We know now that there are microplastics everywhere. There are microplastics in our bodies. These are things that for decades people have been, on the one hand, warning about. And on the other hand, there's always this sort of voices that say, oh, don't be chicken little. The sky's not falling. Don't worry. These are only tiny amounts. There's something called the precautionary principle, which, and this is something that came from Theo Colburn and the Wingspan Coalition decades ago, where they basically said the onus of figuring out whether these things are a problem should not be on the consumer. They should be on the corporations. But the reality is, corporations are not really paying attention enough to these things. And all I can say is that in the last 3 decades, we've seen, significantly more exposures in the environment, and we've seen significantly more autoimmune disease, hormone problems, fertility problems, neurologic problems in kids, increase in Alzheimer's, like all these things. Can we say that those things do or don't cause it? Not 100%, and certainly not for everyone. There's lots of factors, genetics, and all kinds of things. But I guess in my worldview was like, why do I want to find out on my body or my children's body? Or why do I want anyone to find that out? Like, just don't use those things. I saw Erica Badu, I love her music, and she posted something on Instagram today that said, how about instead of putting a pink ribbon on your website for breast cancer awareness, how about stop putting so many chemicals in our environment? And I was like, yeah, right. So if we don't know, like I always say, when in doubt, leave it out. If we don't know these things aren't impacting us, let's find other things that we can use. And it's massively coincidental that in recent decades, I mean, breast cancer rates are going up in younger and younger women, and significantly. Why are we not making the connection? And I'm not
Yeah.
saying that is the only connection, but it used to be that having family history was what we were concerned about. Now it's just like you're a female and you have breasts. That is the risk factor. And this escalation in breast cancer rates, like, can we say it's not microplastics? Can we say like it's not like our human genetics just suddenly changed and we're all more at risk for no reason, you know? So
No,
I'm not a
definitely.
conspiracy theorist by any means, but I'm also like, I'm just a quick story. When I was at Yale Medical School and I was applying for residency, um, I was interviewed by a gentleman who he is or was, I don't know if he's still alive, it's been a couple of decades, but one of the world's leading researchers on estrogen. He helped create the estrogen transdermal patch. And he saw on my application that I was interested in the impact of endocrine disruptors on reproductive health in women. And he looked at me and he said, Dr. Romm, please tell me you don't believe in that BPA crap. I'll never forget that. They're emblazoned in my brain. Don't tell me you don't believe in that BPA crap. Well, ironically, 8 or so years later, 10 years later, the head of reproductive endocrinology, Hugh Taylor at Yale, blew the lid open and found that BPA was inarguably connected to increased miscarriage rates in women. And they banned it in the state because it was in like airline tickets, which women were largely the ones handing them out or receiving them at the gate, and in grocery receipts, shopping receipts, which women were largely the ones handing out at behind the counter and receiving on the other side of the counter. And California followed suit. And then, we know the story. BPA is now being banned in so many things. Well, if these things don't have an impact, why are they being banned? And why do other countries not use them?
No,
So,
definitely.
yeah.
I mean, BPA, all of the various colors that are added to food.
Yeah, California is now banning food coloring. I mean, I can't tell you for decades, doctors have been saying that's BS.
Well,
Like
I
that's just
I
ridiculous.
posted
And
on
now it's like,
my
but is it?
no, I there's this one prenatal called Pregvit, and
Hmm.
it's covered by health insurance in Ontario. I went on my Instagram and I went through the ingredient list of this Pregvit, and there were several known carcinogens
Hmm.
in the prenatal.
Hmm.
And when I posted that, patients were stunned. Like, how
Yeah.
could this possibly be?
And this is why it's so important for women to be deeply self forgiving and deeply understanding of the fact that sometimes, whether it's PCOS or ovarian cancer or breast cancer or endometriosis, this is not your fault. You're not broken. And it's also not just diet, it's not just what you're eating, or it's certainly not just what you're thinking. Many of us, if not most of us, especially of a certain age, have had lifetimes and especially like early childhood exposures to things that we now know are no bueno, right? Like I remember when I was a little girl, if you got a cut, your mom would put this horrible stuff on your skin called methylate, and it was bright orange red and it burned like a mofo. And guess what it was?
I don't know.
Mercury.
Mercury.
Mercury. Yeah, it was mercury in it. Merthiolate. It was mercury in it. I'm like, oh my God, this is where we're going to put it on an open cut? So we have to be very kind to ourselves when these health conditions come up and really know it's not you. Are there things that we can do? Sure. But also, it's not that you did something wrong if you're struggling with any of these. There's no wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. Can we improve? Can we prevent? That's the ideal.
I run into the issue a lot where patients don't want to do these things long term. And often when I give a recommendation similar to, make sure you're getting good sleep, make sure you're eating well, make sure that you're, drinking clean water, filtered water. When I make those recommendations, they say, okay, but for how long? Like, how long do I have to do this for?
Yeah, I just really encourage people to
You're like, for life.
make this a lifestyle, but find the things that they really can do that are low hanging fruit, not super stressful, not expensive. But usually, what I find is that the moms and the families, the couples that are coming to me for fertility, they're excited to know because they want to carry it over to their children too. So I
Right.
haven't seen it be too much of a problem, but really it's like meeting someone where they are. Like, okay, which of these things can you do? The things that you're saying are hard. What are the obstacles to those? And what can we do? What can I do to help you overcome those obstacles? But not making it so many things that it just becomes unsustainable. But, I think that when people add a few changes and they're like, oh, I'm eating this way now, and I'm actually feeling more energetic and feeling better, then they can add the next thing in. I think having flexibility is also really important, just enjoying your life and not becoming consumed or overly, like, hyper vigilant about it. Just being, like, attentive and thoughtful, but not being hyper vigilant to the point of, and then, like, crossing the line into something that you wouldn't usually do now feels like you've traumatized your body, because it's not that simple either.
Do you find that exercise plays a role at all in terms of your practice? Like, do you encourage
Yeah,
people
I do. It's the
to
hardest thing
move?
to get people to do because I think that we are all really, really busy, and our busyness is often sedentary busyness, especially with the advent of computers. I mean, so many people have jobs that are just desk bound, myself included. I mean, I got up, I went, I had a girlfriend staying over, she's a former patient who's become a close girlfriend, staying over for a couple of days. And we got up this morning, we went for a walk, then we came back, we, kind of did some stuff, and then we did a workout together. I have to teach tonight, so I'm going to get up and move in between, but it's not always easy to, get a half hour movement in 3 times a day. But I think it's probably one of the most important. Look, it helps our gut microbiome, it helps our sleep, it helps our cortisol, it helps our moods. I mean, there's nothing about it that's not really important. I think that finding a way. I was at a conference recently, and there was a cardiologist, and she said, I know there's so many rules, like women should exercise, 4 times a week, 10 minutes to VO2 max, da da da, all the things. She's like, look, I know there's no evidence for this, but just find something you love and do it for 30 minutes a day. And I think that's a really good, it's probably not quite enough for optimal muscle tone and all the things, but look, just move, get moving. And if you find yourself sitting at your desk for a couple hours in a row, get up, put on some music, dance, do some jumping jacks, stretch, step outside. I think that's really, really important for our health.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I have one patient and she's gone from, Canada to the States to Europe to explore her fertility concern. She ended up going to Dr. Kwa Kim, who is in Chicago, focusing on reproductive immunology.
Hmm.
And she was stunned because Dr. Kwa Kim told her, you need to move your body for 30 minutes a day. And she
Hmm.
said, okay,
There
but
you
if
have it, right?
but what else? Like, she's like, "No, that's really important for your
Can
immune
I tell
system
you,
to function
I'm
well."
I'm menopausal. Perimenopause was not a problem for me at all, and even the first few years of menopause were not. And then I started having a sleep problem where I just was like waking up at 3 in the morning and 4 in the morning or 2 in the morning, whatever, and having a really, it felt like the lights were on. And I've been an herbalist for 40 years. I tried the things. I tried the nutrients, magnesium, it didn't touch it for me. Melatonin, nothing. Um, and what has really been interesting for me is I started biking about 6 weeks ago, and I also started taking a dance class once a week, salsa class, which is just so fun, and I'm doing it with a girlfriend. And my sleep, I've had, like, 2 not good nights of sleep in 6 weeks since I started doing it. I was like, and biking is also getting me outside. I mean, I get outside a lot anyway, but it's like, 2, 3 hours of, like, a biking trip, and I'm just like, "Oh my god, I didn't need any supplements for this." I'm not saying, it's different for everyone, but I was just like, the change in how I feel, it's my mood, my cognitive function, my energy is always generally good, but it's even better. I'm like, just a basic thing, like getting exercise outside, going to a dance class with a girlfriend. I haven't changed anything else, and I didn't add in or take away any supplements. It's like, it's astonishing to me, for me as a menopausal woman, how that one intervention made a huge difference.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with exercise, so thank you for that.
You're welcome. And again, I think the word exercise has so many connotations of like bad gym classes and all the things. So, like, to me, it's movement and find something that you love doing and just
Yeah.
have a few things that you can vary around. I think weight training is really important, using our big muscle groups, but relaxation and flexibility are important too. So, yoga, whatever, stretching, whatever you like, some kind of dance that gives you a lot of that kind of softer stretching movement. All of those are really important.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast and sharing such like a
Welcome.
wonderful conversation of so many interesting topics. I could talk to you quite literally for the entire day, but you must depart. So thank you
Thank
so
you for
much.
having
I
me.
really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me and the work you're doing for women who I know are struggling with me. It's just so painful. That fertility struggle can be a real grief for so many people. So having good people doing the work is so beautiful.
Thank you so much. I really
You're
appreciate it.
welcome.
Thank you so much for listening this week. Every time that you listen, you share, you rate, you review, it helps boost our show, which not only gives me the motivation to carry forth, but also helps attract new guests with new information. So thank you so much. Please don't forget, again, rate, review, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll talk to you soon on the next episode.